breaking news that's coming in right now. Let's cut across straight to that. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin. There's been a conversation between Prime Minister Modi and the Russian President. We understand, and this is what we're picking up on the conversation that's been had. The Russian President has briefed Prime Minister Modi on the latest developments concerning Ukraine. And Prime Minister Modi has reiterated India's stand, which is that we are standing for peace. We want a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Both leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, have reaffirmed their commitment to further deepening India-Russia ties and the partnership. Prime Minister Modi has also formally invited President Putin to visit India later this year for the annual bilateral summit, which sources tell us could happen at the end of this month. Now, this is a telephone conversation that was had between Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Putin. The timing of this extremely crucial because it's come days after the US slapped that 50% tariff on India. And why? Because they said that this was a penalty for India's ties with Russia for importing Russian oil. India, in the face of these tariffs, has made it very, very clear that our national interests come first, and there's no question of backtracking or backpedaling on our ties with Russia, or for that matter, the Russian oil that we import. Yesterday, Prime Minister Modi had a conversation with the Brazilian president, now with the Russian president. All of this leading to questions about whether this is the BRICS firming up their alliance in the face of aggression and attempted isolation by America. Let me bring in Pranay Upadhyay of India Today Global for more on this. Pranay, what are you picking up on the conversation between Prime Minister Modi and the Russian president? The timing extremely crucial.
Timing is actually very crucial, Akshita, you rightly pointed out, because this timing is important in context of Russian President briefing Prime Minister Narendra Modi about the latest updates on Ukraine. And this meeting, this phone conversation happened after Indian NSA Ajit Doval visited Moscow, and also the US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff visited Moscow. And it has been decided, it has been formally announced by Kremlin that President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin are going to meet. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with this phone call, President Putin briefed Prime Minister Narendra Modi and appraised him about, he shared...
Interrupting, but we just want to also put out details of what the Prime Minister has now detailed on social media, where he's confirmed his conversation with President Putin. He said, and I quote, "Had a very good and detailed conversation with my friend President Putin. I thanked him for sharing the latest developments on Ukraine. We also reviewed the progress in our bilateral agenda and reaffirmed our commitment to further deepen the India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership. I look forward to hosting President Putin in India later this year." That's a message that Prime Minister Modi has put out right after that conversation with President Putin. But Pranay, you were giving us more details of really what was discussed in that conversation.
Here, there are two aspects of it. One is a bilateral India-Russia partnership.
Okay, before
also shows that why India...
Okay, Pranay, I'm just going to come back to you in just a bit. We're having a bit of a problem there with your connection. Let me bring in Anil Trigunaya of the former diplomat who's joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Trigunaya, thank you for your time. What do you make, sir, of the fact that in the last 24 hours, there's been a conversation between the Brazilian president and Prime Minister Modi, and now the Russian president and Prime Minister Modi, all timed to 2 days after that 50% tariff announcement by America?
Well, as you are aware, that President Trump has systematically chosen to go after the countries that are part of the BRICS. They have a problem with Russia, but they could not penalize them or punish them. So therefore, they started going after Brazil. Earlier, they have already been after South Africa. And also recently, we have seen that they have increased the tariff to 50%, the highest on India. And we are seeing all the systematic way that the United States has been continuing to target these countries. And therefore, it is normal that the country's leadership confers with one another and try to find whether we can find some more synergies to expand our bilateral trade and engagement. And that's precisely what happened when President Lula called Prime Minister Modi, or Prime Minister Modi and President Putin called. Of course, President Putin and President Trump might meet, and that is an important meeting. And therefore, as NSA was there, and you know that this later in the year, we are going to have the same bilateral summits that have been started in 2000. So President Putin will be coming here. I think before that, they will be meeting also in China for the SCO summit. So this is important that the close partners, strategic partners, special and strategic partners, do share their concerns, do share their approaches. They talk about how to go about. As you know, that India is now being targeted because it has been importing, unfairly targeted, because it has been importing the Russian oil. As if for the last 50, 60 years, it was India which was importing. It was the Europeans who were emboldened, if at all, the Russians. So that they will not look at it, but they just want to target in a very myopic manner. And that's precisely what is leading to all these conversations, to hedge your bets, to try to create your own, I would say, the firewalls.
Very interesting perspective, and I'd like to discuss that further with you, sir. So I'll request you to stay on with us on this broadcast. I'm just quickly going to take this across also to Preeti Chaudhary to run us through really what the Prime Minister has also said about his conversation with President Putin. Preeti, over to you.
Akshata, the diplomatic posturing clearly on, and you can see that where Prime Minister Modi tweeting out a short while ago, all of this in the backdrop of our NSA going to Russia. The Prime Minister says, had a very good detailed conversation with my friend, President Putin. I thanked him for sharing the latest developments on Ukraine. We also reviewed the progress in our bilateral agenda and reaffirmed our commitment to further deepen the India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership. I look forward to hosting President Putin in India later this year. Subtle but very strong diplomatic messaging. If one needs to pick out 2 points from this, Akshata, very easily, that where you have the Prime Minister who says that he reaffirms the commitment to further deepen the India-US special and privileged strategic partnership. So all that bullying from America and President Trump for India to make a geopolitical choice in the name of tariff, all of that clearly tantamounts to nothing. The Prime Minister giving out a very clear, strong message. What's also interesting, something which the NSA, Ajit Doval, touched on, that you would have President Putin coming into India. The dates need to be confirmed. The Prime Minister putting it out there. I look forward to hosting President Putin in India later this year. So there seems to be an understanding that President Putin would be visiting India sometime later in the year. The date needs to be fixed, but very, very strong diplomatic messaging, which, the strongest right now that we've seen from the Prime Minister. He said it for what it is, where India's response to the bullying from the American president comes into question.
Preeti, thanks very much for joining us with that live update.